is the deep state silencing insiders who threaten the coming narrative that UFOs are a national security threat. Aloha everyone, I'm Michael Salla, and on April 6, I watched a video on the Jim Breslau's show featuring Mike Turber, a former Air Force electronics specialist, who basically recanted his earlier testimony that in 2005 he was told by a former colleague that the Tic Tacs that were sighted by personnel on the USS Nimitz and on the USS Princeton were in fact experimental Air Force spacecraft being tested against the best Navy aircraft and detection radar tracking devices available at the time. According to Turber, his colleague prepared a PowerPoint briefing for a number of agencies and a major aerospace contractor detailing the flight performance and characteristics of the Tic Tac based on the data that had been collected. And according to Turber, he learned that the Tic Tacs had actually been manufactured at Plant 42 right next to Edwards Air Force Base. Certainly impressive testimony, and it boosted claims that a lot of UFOs that people are citing are in fact reverse engineered craft that have been built by major aerospace companies. So Turber's backtracking was really a big surprise. I mean, I've experienced this in the past, so it was still something that I wasn't prepared for, but nevertheless, I mean, it happened. So, you know, that kind of stuff is part of this UFO or exopolitics field where you're dealing with very sensitive issues and people who give testimonies and sometimes they recant, and you know, whether they recanted of their own volition, whether they were pressured into it, you know, one never really can work out for sure. But in the case of Mike Turber, what makes me suspect that he did recant under pressure was that 1 week later, Mark McCandlish, a former patent illustrator who was one of the original 2001 Disclosure Project witnesses that appeared at the National Press Club and discussed the alien reproduction vehicle that he had learned about from a colleague who travelled to Edwards Air Force Base back in 1988 for a classified air show and saw 3 flying saucer craft that were on display for different potential customers. So that was that incident occurred in 1988, and Mark McCandlish came forward and revealed it to the public for the first time. And Mark McCandlish, he actually prepared some illustrations that were very detailed based on what was seen by his colleague Brad Sorensen. Now, according to one of my sources, Dan Willis, also another former Disclosure Project witness, he had been told that Mark McCandlish was going to go to Congress in June and testify about what he knew of these reverse engineered craft. Certainly McCandlish's testimony, if it was going to be given to Congress, would have really presented into the minds of members of the Senate Intelligence Committee who are going to receive the June report from the Director of National Intelligence on behalf of the entire 18 agencies that make up the intelligence community. He would have raised the possibility for senators that these UFOs that are being cited actually could be related somehow to these craft that are being developed in various aerospace companies, and that these are in fact alien reproduction vehicles, that they've been reverse engineered. So what happened was that on April 13, 1 week after Turber recanted his testimony, McCandlish was found dead from a shotgun blast to the side of the head. I was told this by one of Mark McCandlish's colleagues and friends, Rick Price, who says that on the very day, only hours before McCandlish was found dead, he had spoken to him, and that Mark McCandlish was tired, but he by no means sounded depressed, by no means sounded suicidal. And that Mark McCandlish's longtime girlfriend was the one that found him the next morning dead from a shotgun blast. Now, according to Rick Price, the coroner, he spoke to the coroner, and the coroner told him that it would take some time to prepare a final report, but that there were 5 different government agencies looking into the matter. One of my other sources has said that according to his inside information, it's possible that McCandlish had been taken out. So what all this means is that here you have 2 insiders, Mike Turber, Mark McCandlish, who both cast doubt on the idea that these UFOs, these UAPs, as the intelligence community wants to call them, that are the subject of this report that's coming up in June, are in fact reverse engineered craft that have been developed by aerospace companies on behalf of the US Air Force. Certainly that would throw a spanner into the works of what appears to be this emerging narrative that UAPs are a national security threat. That is what we are witnessing now. There's stories that are appearing all over the mainstream media. 60 Minutes ran a major segment. There was a big feature article in the New Yorker, and all the mainstream media are now paying more and more attention, and it's all being spun that these are unknown objects and that they are a national security threat. Now, where that is heading, I mean, we could speculate. Of course, many have been saying, including myself, that there are preparations for an alien false flag invasion. Another possible explanation may be that these UAPs belong to China or Russia, and that therefore the Space Force needs to be boosted with tremendous funding so that it can match what China and Russia is doing. Another narrative may be that these UFOs pertain to some extraterrestrial spacecraft that have been reverse engineered, not so much from the United States, because the US has experienced a lot of difficulty in reverse engineering those. If you've been following the Bob Lazar story, the information from that is that these technologies have been too hard to reverse engineer, and so that could strengthen the idea that yes, extraterrestrials are here, their craft have crashed, the US got their hands on some but weren't able to reverse engineer them, but the possibility is very high that China and Russia have reverse engineered them. And so that would really lead to Congress being pressured to put a lot of funding into Space Force so that the US can deal with this new UAP threat that could be tracked to Russia or China, and with a extraterrestrial element in there. So all of these possibilities are very important that need to be raised, kept in mind. But the fact of the matter is that you have Mike Turber, you have Mark McCandlish, 2 major credible insiders that have now been silenced. In the case of Mark McCandlish, he's been silenced permanently. For Mike Turber, he's had to discredit himself by basically recanting on his earlier testimony. So we all are waiting to see what is going to be dropping with this June UAP report, which is definitely getting incredible coverage in the mainstream media, but it doesn't look like it's going to be something that those of us that are involved in the full disclosure field are going to be very happy about. It's going to be a limited hangout, focusing on the UAPs are a threat scenario, certainly not something that is going to augur well for any kind of full disclosure of what's been really going on. So I have 2 announcements to make. The first is that on June 19, I'm going to be doing another webinar, and this webinar is directly pertinent to what I just discussed. The webinar is going to be called The Untold History of America's Reverse Engineering of Extraterrestrial Spacecraft. And I'm going to go into detail in the very first efforts that were set up dating from the immediate post-war era, where you have the US Air Force setting up the Scientific Advisory Board to oversee the reverse engineering of captured spacecraft that were brought in from Nazi Germany and were crashing all over the southwest of the United States at that time. My second announcement is my new book, the Space Force, Our Star Trek Future. And that's going to be looking at what it is about Space Force that really does encourage optimism that the future is one where we are going to have something like a Star Trek society developing. So that book is now available and you can find it on Amazon, or you can get an autographed version from my website. Don't forget to subscribe to my Exopolitics Today podcast. Thank you for listening, and aloha.